Hey guys! So today you and I are going to talk about differences. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, can you explain to me what the difference is between web development, web design, programming and coding, or are they interchangeable? Yes, I think I can. So you may or may not have heard there are a few terms like, oh, I'm a programmer, I'm a software engineer, or I'm a coder, or so forth and so forth. And trust me when I say this, guys, it's really, really common that things become a little bit ambiguous. One of my favorite terms that is so overused that it's hard to tell what you're actually talking about is API. Well, what type of API are you talking about? Are you talking about an interface in the code? Are you talking about a REST API? Like what specifically are we talking about here? And for programming and coding and software engineering and things like that, it's very much the same thing. So you will definitely meet some people who have opinions about what does it mean to be a programmer, and what does it mean to be a software engineer, and what does it mean to be a coder, and some people like to make a distinction here. I argue that, as with the API thing, the the term is so ambiguous, almost a little bit like engineer sometimes if you ask me, that at this stage you can't just say, hey, I am like a programmer or a software engineer, and then have people automatically understand if there's a difference there or not, because to most people it's the same thing. And programming and coding, at least from what I've always seen, guys, it is the same thing. They are interchangeable. Programming a computer or coding, so to speak, is the same deal. You are writing software like in some type of programming language, and that is what we call coding. And programming is basically the same thing. You can absolutely make an argument for that programming can be a larger term than that, but at least in the context of web, it is the same thing. And as for web development, web design, this again becomes a little bit ambiguous. With web design, it's a little bit easier, because web design basically means that you are designing for the web. So for most intents and purposes, not always, you are not the person who's writing the code per se. You can be, like, remember now guys, you can be a full stack developer and a designer. Like, you can build a whole website and by yourself, because it's just different areas of things that people are doing. Some people do like only web design, and then it's mostly about working in things like Figma or Sketch or Photoshop or similar sorts of tools, and producing artboards or visualizations of how a website should look. Or if you're a user experience type of person, you might look at UX design, these sorts of areas. So it's more about designing how an experience on the web. Whereas web development is usually, I mean, this is technically part of web development, but usually what we are talking about when we talk about a web developer is a person who is either a front-end developer or a back-end developer or a full-stack developer. And that's where the coding and the programming usually comes in. As I said, like, technically web development, I mean, it's the whole process. You could encapsulate everybody who's ever been part of a team that works on the web, but as I said, with the API, most people, when they say that there's an API, they almost like it's almost a byword for REST API, almost always, but it's not exclusively. The meaning isn't exclusive in any sense, and it's the same thing with web development. And so if we get into the back-end and the front-end type of things, well, basically the web developers are usually categorized into three different areas. You have front-end developer, back-end developer, and full-stack developer, usually. Now these are the basics. And so front-end developer is usually the person who's writing the front-end code, so what you see on a website, basically, like the thing that the web designer designed in something like, say, Photoshop or similar sorts of solutions. That visualization they will take, and they will convert that into HTML, CSS, JavaScript, these sorts of technologies usually. And for the back-end developers, it's usually that they work with, well, they create the server, or they build a web server of some sort that usually serves up all the files you see on the web and so forth, so that when you actually go to a www, whatever you're going to, you're actually going to get something, because that's how the web works. For those of you who may not know that, the web is basically just a gigantic network of various computers, and so the backend developers, what they do, they will build a program that you put on one of those computers, and then we're not going to go into networking and stuff like that, but basically when you go to this URL that you're going to, you send a request over your network to that computer, and then the backend developer's code runs and serves up the stuff that the front-end developer has built and the UI, the web designer has designed for you. And then of course you might have databases, like maybe you're submitting forms or you're adding things to a product cart or something like that, and then usually you're using the code that the front-end developer has built for you when you're going to your browser. That's what you're interacting with. But the data that you see on the website, like all the information, all your comments and posts and things like that, and when you click, buy or things like that, then the code that code is sending data or getting data from the backend server, and that's usually where it connects to a database. It might store your favorite comments or your likes or whatever, and so next time you refresh your page or go to the website again, you get that data up, and that is what the backend developer does usually. So what I want you to take away from this is that there are ambiguities between various terms, absolutely. So the terms that I've given you now, they might not be, like, not everybody's going to 100% agree with what I've said, but in loose terms, you can say that programming and coding is the same thing. Software developer is the same thing as a front-end developer, back-end developer. It's just a umbrella term for programmer, coder, whatever. And some people will not agree here, just so you know. And it doesn't mean that I'm wrong or that they're right or they're wrong and I'm right. It depends, as I said, always down to the details. What do you mean by that thing? Because some people will say that there's a web developer and then there's an application developer, or like there are different types of developers, guys. And so the easiest way to get some clarity into what people are talking about when you're a little bit unsure, just ask them what part of the development process are you working with, like that, be a little bit more concrete. Just as I said with the API, like sometimes you don't know what they mean, and so try to get them to clarify. And that is when terms like front end, back end, full stack, these sort of things start coming in. So a web designer is usually a person, like that's not interchangeable usually, it's a person who designs the visual experience or the user experience of the website. A front-end developer is usually the person who writes that code that is necessary to show the UI and actually have something to work with when you're clicking on things in your browser. Backend developer is usually the one who creates the server application that serves up all the data and stores things in a database and things like that. So the website actually does something when you go to different URLs and you submit forms and things like that. And full stack, if I didn't mention that, is basically just a person who can do both front end and back end. Usually it's a person who can work on both sides, but the roles are basically the same. It's just that you find them in the same person. And as I said, you can be a web designer, front end, back end. You can build the whole thing and do all of them things, and that's going to be a web developer, or what you're doing is web development. And for programming and coding and things like that, you can almost always associate it with, if it has software programmer or coder or something in its name, it is basically interchangeable. You might be doing different types of coding in different programming languages in different areas and so forth, but it's still the same thing. Coding and programming, for all intents and purposes, will mean the same thing to most people. Have a great day.